Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It has been a while. I have been on a little bit of a hiatus. Apologies for that. Been dealing with some different personal things, but I am back. We are officially back, and we will get into a very normal groove going forward. We'll try to release these every single Wednesday going forward, and might just do 2 times a week here pretty soon because a lot of stuff happening in college football over the last month. But we're going to start today talking about the draft. We'll talk about how the SEC and the Big Ten continue to and really kind of lengthen that gap that they have on everyone else in college football. We'll talk about how Ohio State got pretty close to that Georgia record of players drafted. We'll have my favorite picks of the round, recruiting rankings, still doing very, very good for what they are worth. Then we'll take a little bit of a break before we get into the NFL draft winners and losers. Love to kind of get into this after the draft. Obviously not overly college football related, but get to talk about these guys one last time before they officially go off to the NFL level. Then we'll do a little bit of the updates from all the time that I've been off. So we will talk about that Nico Iamaleava situation that continues to develop just a little bit, not necessarily around Nico, but around his little brother Madden, and we'll talk about that obviously as a couple of weeks go on here. Then we'll talk about the house settlement. Feels like it's getting closer and closer to approval, but there's one last thing that needs to happen that might be a little bit tougher than we'd like it to be, but definitely we'll talk about that. We'll get into Lee Corso retiring. We'll get into a couple other stories around college football that are very interesting on Twitter right about now. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing, and let's go ahead and start with the draft. Let's talk about what was a huge weekend for so many kids out there. A lot of guys that fell just a little bit further than they want, and we will talk about Shedeur Sanders and Quinn Ewers here in a minute. But let's start with what I think is the biggest story of the draft and what is most pertinent, at least to the college football fans out there. The SEC and the Big Ten got 26 of the 32 first-round guys came from those two conferences, and it shows there is a gap there. There's no doubt about it. And one of the big things to remember here is guys that were drafted, whether it was in the first round like Matthew Golden or it was a little bit later in the round like Will Howard, these are two guys that were Big 12 players. You know, Matthew Golden coming from Houston over to Texas, Will Howard going from Kansas State to Ohio State. That adds another one for Big Ten and SEC when you go to the grand overall picks, which don't get a lot prettier for the small conferences, frankly. 26 of 32 overall in the first round, and, excuse me, 1 second here, apologies for that. But dominated the first round, dominated overall. 150 picks of the 257 picks in the entire draft. It was a lot. In that independent, it was just one UConn player and then a bunch of Fighting Irish. But overall, really, really incredible performance from the SEC and the Big Ten, as we've pretty much become accustomed to them having around this time of year. Definitely does show what this college football world is about right about now. The SEC and the Big Ten are just a little bit different, and you'll see that play out over the next year or so as we get into the CFP and how is it going to change going into next year, and will the SEC and the Big Ten get more bids than everyone else and everything like that. This will be brought up. Now, should it be brought up? I think that there's a good debate for that. But at the end of the day, this definitely will be brought up in that room by Greg Sankey, by Tony Petitti, and we'll see if the ACC and the Big Ten can, at the very least, stay at the table. That'll be a very interesting thing, and obviously something that we will talk about coming up because there's some inklings of some possible changes going into this year. I'd be surprised if they got anything on paper until 2026. But the SEC and the Big Ten dominate the draft. That's what they do. That's what they've done for quite some time. And the gap seems to be growing just a little bit more aggressively because kids understand that if you want to get drafted high, those two conferences are a great place to go for scouts to see you. Then you got the teams, and Ohio State obviously was going to be the team that was going to lead the way in this one. They came very close to that number 15 number that I believe in 2021 that Georgia broke, maybe 2022. I could be remembering there, but Ohio State, 14 players drafted, just about everyone. And frankly, a lot of those guys could have gone in last year's draft, but they found their way back to Columbus. They did what they wanted to do, not everything they wanted to do, but got that national title to their name, and they move on forward. And all of those guys cannot wait to see what they do at the next level. Will Howard could be the starter for Pittsburgh when they start the season, but obviously something we can talk about as the season goes on. Georgia, 13. They just funnel guys into the NFL at this point. It is a great recruiting pick for Kirby Smart every single April, where he gets to say, did you see how many guys got their name called on draft weekend? So that's obviously another win for Kirby Smart. Texas finds their way up. They were 11 players drafted last year, got 12 this year. We'll try to break that record again next year, and definitely some mock drafts that have already come out. Not sure Arch Manning's going to be in that group, but obviously something that we can talk about with time. Then Oregon and Ole Miss clear out the top 5. Then you got Alabama, Florida, LSU, Miami, Michigan right under them, Notre Dame, Penn State, a lot of other teams. Penn State's one of those that probably could have had a couple more guys, but a lot of guys found their way back to State College, and they're starting to load up. We'll talk about the transfer portal in much more depth next week. We'll get into all of the different implications there, but at the end of the day, a lot of very nice things happening over there in State College, and this draft, although they only had 5 guys picked, probably could have been closer to about 8 or 9 guys picked if everyone ended up leaving. But let's get into some of the big-time storylines with the players, and as much as we want to talk about Shedeur Sanders, and we will get there, I promise you, we got to talk about the guy that went number 1 overall. Because I just showed you, or I will show you here in a minute, the breakdown of the stars. 5 stars, how many went in the first round, how many 4 stars, 3 stars, and unranked. He is one of the non-ranked players. He was a 0-star coming out of high school, found his way to Incarnate Word, played incredible football for them, went up to Pullman, Washington, played really good football up there as well, and then obviously this last year in Coral Gables does not need to be talked about anymore. He was absolutely incredible, the best player, the best quarterback at the very least in the country, and just a really special player, obviously has a special mindset, and I think Tennessee's going to like this kid just fine. Might have some growing pains here and there. Obviously, there are some worries about his play, but at the end of the day, a very talented kid and a guy that has that killer instinct that you very much need to succeed at the next level. So as much as we will talk about all the craziness that happened in the later rounds here in a second, just wanted to give Cam Ward his flowers. He did an incredible job throughout this process, has done an incredible job really throughout the entirety of college, and to get recognized this way is just downright incredible. Then you had Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, those guys come off the board, and we'll talk about those guys plenty. I can promise you that as they continue their journey into the NFL. But the big story was Shedeur Sanders. That was the story that led just about every single sports show the next day, and it was a big story. There's no doubt about that, because it is a weird situation, because there was a lot of talk about this guy being a first-round pick and maybe the number 1 overall pick and being the guy that leads a new franchise, becomes a starter going into his rookie year, and takes off from there. It didn't really play out that way, and there were a lot of different factors that went into that. A lot of people made a lot of noise about the off-the-field stuff and how he didn't do well in interviews. Sound like him and Brian Dable had a little bit of a war of words at times during their interview, and obviously they ended up going with Jackson Dart. I fully understand that decision. Now, I had Shedeur Sanders as my number 3 quarterback in this, or number 2 or number 3. Him and Jackson Dart was a outright coin flip to me, if I'm being totally honest. So I do think there were players that were not as talented as him, that don't have the ceiling he does, that were drafted ahead of him. I have no doubt in that. But there is this theory going around the sports world right about now that there is collusion involved, and that all 32 teams and Roger Goodell came together to say, don't draft this kid very high. That didn't happen for a number of reasons, but maybe mainly because 32 teams weren't looking at Shedeur Sanders. There were not 32 teams that were going to draft Shedeur Sanders regardless of what happened in his draft process. So there were about 5 or 6 teams. You have the Raiders, you have the Steelers, the Titans were looking at him at some point throughout this process, obviously, the Giants, a couple other teams that possibly could have taken a chance on Shedeur Sanders, could have picked him in the first round. So once that Pittsburgh pick went by, I don't think there was really any reality that he was getting picked. And even when the Giants traded up and people started talking, oh, it's got to be Shedeur right here, I was thinking it was going to be Jackson Dart. Just because of the system that Brian Dable runs, it makes a lot more sense for Jackson Dart to fit there. And frankly, I think Shedeur ended up in a rather good situation, all things considered. But that's something we can talk about. But overall, he gets drafted and all the talk immediately starts. Or he doesn't get drafted, frankly, after that first day, and the talk starts very aggressively, mainly from Mel Kiper's mouth. He might have said more about Shedeur Sanders than anyone in the world this past weekend, but at the end of the day, this is a very talented kid. He also comes with certain things, and those certain things are he is going to be the most talked about guy in your quarterback room regardless. It almost did not matter what team you went to. Patrick Mahomes might have been a little bit hard to top, I'll give you that, but at the end of the day, of any of the teams that he was going to go to, he was the story, whether he's starting from day one or not, and that will be the case in Cleveland when he officially gets up there and gets going, and I think he's done a great job with this entire process. I think The reality is he expected to go in the first round. You saw that party he had. You saw all the different knickknacks they had going around. He obviously expected to go in the first round. He ends up going in the fifth to a team that I don't think Dion was all that excited about. Now, very excited to be drafted, obviously, but I think he's handled this very, very well. That being said, if he is going to be the backup for your team and you are, let's say, the Browns in the second round or the third round when they drafted Dylan Gabriel or all these different things. If you were going to have that guy as your backup, you better be ready for him to be talked about as if he's the starter. And for him to, if he gets in the game for a drive or two and has two nice drives, people will be asking for him to be the starter. And I think some teams just did some cost-benefit analysis and said, we like him. We might like him a little bit more than the quarterback we're about to take, but the quarterback we're about to take will be able to sit back and will be able to not be talked about a ton. And it's not necessarily all Shedeur's fault by any means. It's not like he can avoid the talk. He is a Sanders. He is going to get all the talk regardless. So all things considered, it's not necessarily the best way that this could have happened. It's not the way he wanted this to go down. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, I think he is in a relatively good spot. Now, I get this sounds crazy because the Browns has been known as the quarterback graveyard over the past 20 years in the NFL. I totally understand that. But just from a pure stance of does he fit in this offense, I think he fits in the Browns offense, Kevin Stefanski's offense, about as well as any offense in the entire NFL. Now, I do think the Raiders would have been an absolutely fantastic fit with Pete Carroll, but they ended up going in another direction, picked up a quarterback late, and obviously have Geno Smith. But you also have Joe Flacco there. Now, I tend to believe Joe Flacco will win that job. I think Kenny Pickett will likely be cut. That obviously will fluctuate. We'll see what happens there. Regardless, you have a guy to learn from, and you have someone that has been through this league a little bit, has been on a couple of teams, whether you're talking about Flacco or Pickett, has played in a lot of different systems, and he will be able to learn from those guys. And then he just got to beat out Dylan Gabriel. And whatever happened with these two picks, whether it was, coach's decision for Dylan Gabriel and owner's decision for Shedeur Sanders, you got a very talented kid. You got a kid that absolutely can be a starter in this league if he's given time, if he's given space to develop, and I think Kevin Stefanski is a guy that can get that out of him. Now, it'll all depend on Shedeur Sanders. I think we all understand that. It'll all depend on what he's willing to give, how much he's willing to give, and how much he is willing to sit and wait and continue to get better in the shadows and all of that great stuff that we talk about all the time. If you're going to be a backup quarterback, it's all about being ready, and he might not even be the backup. He might be the third string. He might be the practice squad guy, but still being able to come up to work and be ready to roll every single day and be able to handle some of the relationships that are going to be a little bit difficult at times. Now, there are a lot of players on that team that seem to be thrilled that he is there. Don't seem to be quite as thrilled for Dylan Gabriel, but at the end of the day, he's a very talented kid. They got him in the fifth round. They got a kid that could very well lead their franchise going forward in the fifth round. So it's not ideal. It's not the way that Shedeur wanted this to go down. He definitely didn't want the prank call to happen, which is a whole other thing. As you can see, the Falcon poster behind me. Didn't love that by any means. It was a terrible, terrible move by Jack Solbrick. But at the end of the day, he's handled that very well. I think he's handled this entire situation very well. I think at the end of the day, you're in a pretty good spot. Maybe not making quite as much money as you would have thought in your rookie contract, but a very good offense. Definitely some people to learn from in that building. And now we'll just see what happens. It'd be very, very cool if he could find a way to be a very successful quarterback because he would let those teams know about it. I can promise you that. But he found his landing spot. It took him a little bit longer, but he is very, very happy up there in Cleveland. And we'll see what happens from here. A very weird quarterback room that will be talked about quite a bit. But Shedeur Sanders, everything is still very much in front of him. So we'll see what happens there. But the other story was Quinn Ewers, the other quarterback that dropped a little bit further than a lot of different people had him mocked, including myself. Very much thought this guy was going to go round 3, maybe early round 4. He falls all the way to round 7. And there's a lot of very, very good reasons for that, a lot of good football reasons. I think the biggest one is probably the health. He has been injured for a number of different seasons. Literally every season he's been a starter, he has not played throughout the entire season. That is an issue. There's no doubt about that. And there are some things, even this past year, where it's a little bit of a non-contact type injury. There are worries there, no doubt about that. But I don't think anyone would have suspected that he goes in the 7th round. But much like Shedeur Sanders, you find yourself down in Miami where Mike McDaniel runs about as close as you're going to find to Steve Sarkisian's offense in the entire NFL. So overall, not the worst scenario. You get to learn from Tua, so he did drop a little bit further. The thing I want to talk about here, and the thing that I think everyone loved to talk about here, was the Arch Manning of it all, and the story that was coming out at the end of the season that it is going to be Arch's team going into 2025 regardless of what Quinn Ewers decides to do, whether it's the NFL draft or transfer portal or come back to Texas to be the backup. That wasn't going to happen, but obviously that was one of the options in front of him. It sounds like he had $8 million on the table. It was said it was from Notre Dame, Miami, a lot of different teams out there. I lean Notre Dame because $8 million is not necessarily not doable for Notre Dame. So I do think that tends to be the team that was going after him. And everyone said this after he got drafted. He's going to make $800,000, not $8 million this next year with the Miami Dolphins and not with Notre Dame. But first of all, $800,000 is a lot of money. I don't want that to get lost in all of this. $800,000 is way more than a lot of people in this country and worldwide make. But secondly, we should celebrate this. I fully understand that it is a thing that we can point and laugh at. You know, a guy could have made $8 million, but now he's making $800,000. But those same people that will tell you that he should have gone back to school, that he should have transferred, that he should have gone to Notre Dame, taken all that money and seen what happened next year. All those people will then tell you that college football is broken because of NIL, because all of these kids only care about money. They only care about all of the different things that go with NIL, and they only make decisions based on what that dollar amount is at a certain school compared to another. He obviously didn't make that decision. And if anyone's wondering, if he was not going to be a first-round pick, he was not making $8 million next year. Period. End of story. Even at the NFL, those second-round picks, they're not making $8 million. So he made a decision. He made a non-money decision to go to the NFL for a couple of different reasons. One, he didn't want to be a college football player anymore. It's not the craziest thing in the world that a guy that has gone through as much different things as he has would want to, take his chance. He's also as healthy as he's been in a very, very long time, gets a chance to go through this process, gets a chance to walk into the NFL and continue to get healthy behind Tua Tagovailoa. So it's a great situation in terms of his health, in terms of just the timing of it all. But on top of that, it's a decision that I think a lot of us hope that other people would make. It's a decision that he preserves his Texas legacy. He goes down as a Texas Longhorn. Now, he will have that a detour in Columbus, and that will be a part of his story, obviously, with NIL becoming such a huge deal. But at the end of the day, he will be remembered for that jersey. He will be remembered as a Texas Longhorn. He will be remembered forever as the guy that brought them back to the mountaintop. And that's a valuable thing. So all of these people that came out of the woodwork and said, wow, Quinn Ewers is such a dummy. Why would he go back? Why would he go to the NFL draft, get drafted in the 7th round when he could have made $8 million from Notre Dame? He did it because he's doing the thing that everyone claims that they want from these athletes. He is prioritizing legacy. He is prioritizing loyalty to a certain school over the dollar figure that has been thrown in his face. So I don't know why people dunk on it. I think just because it's easy to get likes on Twitter because you do it. But at the end of the day, this is a decision that I very much applaud. I think it's a decision that all of us should applaud much, much more than we do. But at the end of the day, people are going to do what they're going to do online. I think Quinn Ewers made a great decision. And I think although he definitely wanted to hear his name called a little bit earlier in the day on Saturday, he got the right team. I think Miami's a great spot for him, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens with Quinn Ewers and if that was the right or wrong decision. Then we got to get into my favorite picks for each round because there were some really good picks in this NFL draft. And I'll start with the number 3 overall pick, Abdul Carter, going to the Giants. This is just a dude. He's an absolute freak. He was the best player in the draft, if you were to ask me. He is everything you could possibly want in an edge rusher. There are a lot of very good edge rushers in this draft. 2 of them went to my favorite team, the Falcons, Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. This will be the best edge rusher in this class. When we look back in 10 years, this will be the best player in this draft. He will end up being a Hall of Famer. He is an absolute freak and someone that the Giants are going to love for a very long time, as long as they don't let him go to the Eagles, who actually did make my other favorite pick of the first round. Jahad Campbell, getting him at 31 is just ridiculous, and it's something that happens for the Eagles pretty consistently. They tend to like the guys from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Athens, Georgia quite a bit, and they're winning quite a bit, so it might just be going well for them. But Jahad Campbell's incredible. He can do literally everything you could possibly want. Very good pass rusher for a middle linebacker, a guy that can make all of the plays in the world. And he will absolutely be making those plays for the Eagles. I think he's a day one starter. I think he is ready to roll, and I think he's going to be a big time impact player for this Eagle team going forward. Then you get into the second round, and I don't know how Travion Henderson fell here. Frankly, Quinshon Judkins going before Travion Henderson is not something I expected to happen, but at the end of the day, the Patriots got a dude. They got a absolute franchise running back. They got a guy that, if you watch his tape, you're going to love that pass pro. And I'm sure Drake May has been watching that very, very consistently over the last little bit, watching him and Will Campbell and feeling very good about what he's going to be doing in the pocket next year. And then later, not that much later, frankly, just a couple of picks later, Luther Burden goes to the Bears, another guy that there are some issues here. There are some worries, how much does he love football? How much is he going to put in every single play if he is not the feature guy on the offense? The reality is he is an absolute joystick. You can play around with him as much as you want. You can do so many different things with him, and Ben Johnson likes to play around with some things. So I think Luther Burden was a great pick. He obviously helps Caleb Williams quite a bit because you can just dump it off to him and let him go for 50 yards. Very talented kid, and frankly, I thought he might find his way into the first round, but fell to the second day, and I think the Bears got a very, very good wide receiver here. And in the third round, one of my favorite picks is Jalen Noel by the Texans. This might have been my second or third favorite wide receiver in this draft. He is a freak. He can absolutely fly down the field. The hands are absolutely elite. Can play a little bit of punt returner if you need him to. Probably won't fall into that role if I'm being totally honest. I think he fits perfectly into that offense. You have Nico Collins. They also added his buddy Jaden Higgins earlier in the draft, the Texans did, so they're going to have a really fun wide receiver core. And CJ Stroud feels very good about the guys that he has coming in. Loved the duo coming out of Iowa State, and they both found their way down to Houston, and it'll be really fun to watch them at the next level. I think Jalen Noel is one of those guys that we just look back on and say, how did he find his way to the third round? Same thing with this next guy. Xavier Watts finding his way to pick 98 is just insane. And this is not just because I love the Falcons, but it's insane that the Falcons were able to pick up this guy. He will be an immediate day one starter. He will play that strong safety role next to Jesse Bates. And frankly, that might be the best safety duo in the entire league. He is an incredible, incredible player, very instinctual, is always going to be where you need him to be in, is obviously a ball hawk. 13 picks in the last couple of years, the most in the entire D1. And also the Falcons got the next guy down on the list, Billy Bowman. So incredible, incredible stuff from the Falcons to get Xavier Watts here. Really, really talented player and someone that I think could end up being a 10-year vet in this league. Then you got CJ West in the fourth round to the 49ers. He is going to be one of the better run stuffers you have ever seen. He is so, so incredible to watch. I think the reality of the 49ers draft was they had to figure out defense very quickly. They end up getting Alfred Collins early in the second round, a very athletic, bendy defensive tackle that can get after the passer. Then you get CJ West, the guy that's going to plug gaps, the guy that's going to make plays in the run game and make it really, really hard for just about any run game to get going. I think this is a very, very good player. I think this is someone that will take over in the center of that 49ers defensive line and will hang out there for quite some time. Very talented player, and cannot believe he got his way to Saturday, frankly. Then you got Jack Sawyer, and this is really just because I know he's going to be a productive player for them. It's not necessarily going to be the craziest numbers. I don't think he's going to, flash with 15 sacks in a year or even 12 sacks in a year. I know he's going to play the run incredibly well every single time. I know he's going to be a great addition to guys like Alex Highsmith and guys like TJ Watt, obviously, to free them up to do even more on the other side. This is a guy you got in the fourth round that is going to play significant snaps for this team. Now, it might take him a little bit of time to get all the nuances down right away, but the reality is the Steelers got a guy that is going to play, and he's going to give you just about everything he has. I can promise you that, because if you watched him at Ohio State, he will be the heart and soul of that defense rather quickly, if I'm being totally honest. And then in round 5, Shedeur Sanders was a great pick here. And it's a very weird pick, obviously, especially when you factor in Dylan Gabriel getting picked in the third round to the Browns. A lot of different moving parts there that are rather hard to figure out. But the reality is, Shedeur Sanders finds his way to the Browns. I think it's a great pick. Anytime you can get a genuine potential franchise quarterback any later than the fourth, you've done a great job. It's a weird circumstances. We'll talk about them in the next segment. But at the end of the day, Shedeur Sanders is a Brown. Very good pick, very talented player, and low risk, if I'm being totally honest. And then Jaden Blue finding his way to the Cowboys. I think that is a great pick. I think this is a player that if you watch him enough, I think you'll realize that if he got more snaps at Texas, if he got more touches on the ball, he would have been a really special player. He would have been an over 1,000-yard guy, had a couple of injuries, had a couple of things come up throughout his career, but if he was not part of a outright committee, if it was just him out there, he would have made a lot of big-time plays and would have been probably a little bit higher in this draft board. But I think the Cowboys got a very good player here in round 5, and I think a guy that will make some noise pretty immediately because the Cowboys really need someone to make noise at that running back position. Moving to the 6th round, Ahmad Hassanin is the perfect fit for the Lions. I know he said in his post-draft interview that he would die for Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell might just ask you to do that, and I think Ahmad Hassanin might just actually be willing to do that. He is an absolute freak of nature, a guy that really loves football, has not been playing it for all that long, still a guy that came over from Egypt, is still meeting his potential. So finding a way to get this guy in the 6th round, very much a buy low, possibly sell high, hopefully never have to sell. But at the end of the day, Ahmad Hassanin is a guy that fits what the Lions are as a culture and is going to be a guy that you can continue to develop and continue to make a absolute freak at the next level. And then Tommy Mellott. This one just kind of made me smile, if I'm being totally honest, mainly because the Raiders drafted him as an outright wide receiver at the next level. We might have just found our next Julian Edelman. Now, I won't go crazy here. I'm not going to say he's going to win 3 championships or anything like that. I do think this is a guy that you can play around with a lot. And I think Pete Carroll's going to have quite a bit of fun with the 2 quarterbacks that he got in that 6th round, where he got Tommy Mellott and then right after ends up getting Cam Miller from NDSU. It'll be really interesting to see how he employs those guys, but Tommy Mellott especially, cannot wait to see what he can do. And then in the 7th round, I think Quinn Ewers falls under the same category of Shedeur Sanders. Now, I think it's a little bit less likely that Quinn Ewers ends up being the franchise guy that Shedeur is capable of being. That being said, you go into an offense that really does fit what you did in college, a very accurate passer that if he can get healthy, we saw what it looked like in the Michigan game, we've seen what it looked like in the Alabama game a couple of years ago. That is in there. If Mike McDaniel can really bring that out of him, can stabilize him and get him healthy and get him rolling, he could be a player that ends up taking over for the Dolphins for quite some time. So you got to love the pick in the 7th round. And then Ricky White, the 3rd, going to the Seahawks. Very talented player. A terrifying guy that, frankly, if he's not on the 53-man roster, I'd be shocked. If he's not making an impact on this team in this year, I'd be shocked. It might not be a wide receiver. It's going to be somewhere. He's very, very good in punt coverage, very good at blocking punts every now and then, so he will be making plays for the Seahawks, I can promise you that. And as I'm going a little bit long here, let's get into this very last thing. The 1st round picks, when you talk about star rating, the recruiting rankings are still very, very good. Blue Chips took up 81.3% of the 1st round. Totally dominated, and it's incredible when you actually put it into context. Obviously, it doesn't mean that 2 stars can't be successful. It doesn't mean that guys that are 3 stars can't find their way to the 1st round. It's just to say, when you get a 5-star and you really lock him up and get him signed, and obviously you got to keep him on campus now with the portal, but at the end of the day, celebrate that 5-star that you signed, because he could very well end up being a 1st-round draft pick, and as we all know, all this is about is recruiting, so that could end up turning into a couple more 1st-round draft picks. So it's an incredible thing that these recruiting sites still find a way to pick out the best guys every single year. Obviously, guys like Quinn Ewers slid a little bit further in. There will be outliers, but there's a remarkable hit rate from this group, and will be very interesting to watch what happens going forward with these guys. But let's take our first break. Doing a little bit long. It was a crazy draft weekend. There's no 2 ways about that. But let's take our first break here. When we come back, let's just get into some winners and losers from this past draft. Obviously, a little bit blurring the lines between college football and NFL, but indulge me here for just 1 second. But we will be back right after this, so stick with us.